F1. Red flag. Red flag's to slow down. What?
The checkered flag is waiting.
I can see our Checkered Flag podcast being quite spicy.
5 Live's Checkered Flag podcast.
Welcome to the Formula One paddock, and as you can hear, we're being serenaded by two fabulous gentlemen on the back of a trailer attached to a tractor, holding an accordion, playing a cello, and they're entertaining everyone here in the Formula One paddock. Beautiful skies, blue skies, sunny. We've got the Styrian Mountains just around us here at the Red Bull Ring. It's all rather beautiful, and that's a perfect setting to talk about the upcoming Austrian Grand Prix. And for the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to be joined by former F1, nearly said legend, but driver, Jolyon Palmer, and top journalist Scott Mitchell-Marm, who writes for the race. Guys, welcome to Austria. It's a beautiful place to go racing, isn't it?
I think it's probably the most scenic race of the season. I'm probably the less qualified person out of us to say what it's like to go racing here, so I'll hand that one over to Jolyon.
It is nice though, isn't it? Driving in between like the mountains. It feels like it's just a really atmospheric place. I don't think the accordion gets enough credit. There's a lovely sound in the back.
Did you play it at school?
No, that was one that I didn't go near. It seems, I don't know how they make noise. It's baffling, isn't it?
It's better not to know.
They've just stopped, and I thought there was going to be rapturous applause, but maybe that'll come later over the course of the weekend. And they're doing a great job of rousing the spirits here as we head into the weekend, which has a bit of a different format, guys.
You don't get many accordions in the UK, do you? I feel like it's a very European feel, the accordion.
You're right, and actually they look wonderful, these gentlemen wearing wonderful hats, beards all beautifully coiffed. The man's actually rolled his moustache, and they're starting up again. This is the perfect backing track.
I like that they really lean into that element of it, and also we often see it with some of the teams as well when they don the lederhosen and traditional dress. It's a race with a bit of character.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. It does feel quite different here. It's a very remote area in Spielberg. It's an hour out of Graz, which is the nearest city. It is very much in the mountains with the lederhosen, but nonetheless, you get huge crowds. The Dutch army are here already on a Thursday cheering on Verstappen. They were raucous earlier on. I'm not quite sure what it was, but they were in full voice already, and it creates this really cool atmosphere. And the track, 7 corners, is really quite a simple track with a few quirks to it, some big braking zones in the first half, some fast corners in the second half, pretty aggressive curbs. There's reliability concerns as well because we're at a bit of altitude. So whilst it's kind of simple, there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a fun weekend.
It is a fun weekend, all that to consider for the teams and drivers, and then we add into the mix that it's a sprint weekend. So we'll just run through the rules and regs because obviously they've changed for 2023. This is the second sprint weekend. We now have a format where qualifying on the Friday afternoon sets the grid for the Grand Prix, and then Saturday's all about the sprint. We've got the sprint shootout and the sprint itself. So actually Saturday's a sort of standalone event in and of itself, which perhaps people prefer. Jolyon, what are your thoughts? Is it a good thing for Formula One?
Well, we had one, didn't we, in Baku this year, and it just feels like it's kind of feels pretty breathless working in that weekend, where the fun part is every session counts, but the negative side is that the race counts for less of the whole weekend, because by the time you get to the Grand Prix on Sunday, I feel like people have had so much excitement already, a race start, 2 qualifyings. So I worry that it belittles the Grand Prix a little bit, and that's my opinion, that it's kind of almost too much. I think I preferred it last year when the sprint counted towards the Grand Prix and it was all one weekend rather than a standalone Saturday sprint.
I think that's my biggest concern or issue with it, is that I understand the reasons for that detachment of it, that there was some relatively reasonable logic behind it. There complaints from some teams or drivers that they were deliberately driving conservatively in the sprint race because they didn't want to throw away a good grid position in the Grand Prix. The flip side of that now is that if you're outside of the points paying positions, you're racing for nothing on the set, absolutely nothing, and it has detached it completely from the weekend, so the flow of a weekend's disrupted. It doesn't work in the same way, and you kind of get to Saturday and it's still interesting because a qualifying session is better than that Saturday morning practice session we had before, and you're watching a race in the afternoon instead of qualifying. So in the entertainment stakes, it's better. But in terms of the weekend as a whole, I don't know if I love it.
Yeah, I think that's the lure, isn't it? To have just entertainment and action the whole way through. And when you look at it, you're thinking, do I have a Friday qualifying or an FP2? Well, the Friday qualifying is more interesting. And then do I have an FP3 or another sprint qualifying? I guess still the sprint qualifying is more interesting. Then you get a race. So it seems sort of a weird thing to say that it's not great when you get all this action. But for me, it's just the diluting of the importance of the Grand Prix. And the bit that I don't particularly like about it is that it gives you such a big indication of who's going to win the Grand Prix. When you do a dress rehearsal the day before, and in Baku we had Leclerc on pole for both the Grand Prix and the sprint, and then you just see him being made mincemeat of by the Red Bulls in the sprint, and you kind of know when you get to Sunday that he's got no hope. Which is a bit of a shame.
So we're tiptoeing perhaps in the right direction to enhance the spectacle, give more peaks perhaps to the weekend, but you say it's better, Scott. How do you make it best? What would you want to do?
Well, I think one of the things that they need to do is work out whether they can actually go far enough with it. And the problem with it is that the limitation, I think, ultimately comes from the team's side. I don't think they want radical change. This ultimately came about because F1 was really interested in exploring the possibility of reverse grid races and going down that route. That was torpedoed by the teams ultimately. So they were like, right, okay, well, what change can we make? And unfortunately, when you make decisions by committee, which is the way really the governance process works in F1, you get these kind of glacial changes that they don't represent something big. So if it were me, they're redoing the commercial terms, the Concord Agreement in a few years' time, I would try and strip back some of that team influence on decision making. And if you're going to go for a format change, then you can really go for it. I don't really know whether that is separating it entirely from the weekend or finding a way to mould it together. My personal solution would be to not have Friday and then have that Saturday, Sunday as the quickfire one, especially when all the focus is on sustainability and things like that. But when we're at a point where we're trying to maximise the return on investment for the promoters and everything, you're not going to kill a day of track time. That's just not realistic.
Do you want to be involved in the negotiations as a driver, Jolien, or as a team?
I was never. I just think let the people that make the rules. I do agree with Scott. Even when I was a driver, I was never really on board the drivers demanding that they have their say in the rules, and there was a lot of it going on as well when I was on the grid and the drivers we're not consulted on this. Well, you shouldn't be consulted. You're a player in the game. You know, it's a lot. Football players don't get consulted on is VAR coming in or major changes in that sport or cricket or other sports. So I do think you need a sort of a regulatory body that's separate to the people participating in it. I'm in agreement, Scott.
Well, there we go. That's the format of the weekend that we've got to look forward to. Let's talk about the runners and riders. I mean, we've spoken at length about Max Verstappen and Red Bull achieving great things this year already. Scored their 100th win in Formula One back in Canada 10 days ago. And obviously Max equalling Ayrton Senna's race win victory of 41 now in Canada as well. They're back here on home soil, the first time that they're going to race here since the death of their founder, Dietrich Mateschitz. So it's going to be a poignant weekend, I think. Let's hear how Max Verstappen's feeling heading into his team home race.
You know, we've had already, a few Grand Prix without Dietrich, of course, by our side, and you just have to face it. You have to deal with it, and we race also to make him proud and just carry on that legacy. So coming here, home Grand Prix, we always enjoy coming here anyway, and we want to win, definitely.
The gap to second place was down to 9 seconds last time out in Montreal. Do you expect to be more dominant here at the Red Bull Ring than you were in Montreal?
I don't know, honestly. I mean, in a sprint weekend, so many things can go well or can go wrong. It's always very hectic. So I guess we'll just find out, honestly. I don't know. We can speculate about it now, but we'll find out on Sunday. Okay.
There's a lot of orange in the grandstands. Any message to your fans this weekend?
Don't get too drunk. Just watch the race, enjoy, and it will be good to see them. I mean, it's always nice to see the orange color next to the track. So, and I think also about this track is that on any grandstand you sit, you can actually see a lot of the track, and that makes it, I think, very unique.
Well, Max Verstappen, obviously the favourite for this weekend, probably when it comes to the sprint and the Grand Prix itself on Sunday. But I think the real interest lies in the chasing pack, which in Canada we kind of got the sense were closing a little bit on Red Bull, but maybe it was the track. Scott, you're sort of nodding, maybe shaking your head. That pack being Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, and would you say now in that order?
I think it will change track to track. I don't think I'm brave enough to really say which track they'll be suited best to, but I found it quite interesting that Aston Martin and Mercedes looked closer to Red Bull than ever in Canada, and then they come here suggesting that actually they think that this track will suit their packages better than Canada will. Ferrari's a little bit of a question mark because they were out of position in Canada, but arguably the most competitive they've been on a Sunday this season, but they started so far back because of their relative issues that they weren't a factor in the race. Red Bull even suggested that Ferrari was the fastest car of anyone on all the compounds over the Canada weekend. So how that plays out, I think, changes depending on track characteristics, whether you nail it, and the format this weekend puts a lot of pressure on first practice. Maybe Red Bull potentially gets caught out there, but when Aston had that big upgrade in Canada, I think that was a start of a focus to make that car slipperier, make it faster in a straight line. That's where the big Red Bull advantage is. Well, on a track like this with fewer corners than any other and 3 massive straights, maybe we'll start to see whether that actually works.
The cool thing is, it's difficult to predict where they are, but surely that's the exciting thing about coming to a Formula 1 race. I don't want to know that it's going to be Red Bull, Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari. We want a bit of jumbling up, no?
Without Red Bull, this season would be one of the best ever. I mean, can you imagine? We don't know who's going to turn up and who's going to be fighting for that podium spot, effectively, between Ferrari, who were there a little bit more earlier on. They seem to be dropping back slightly with their upgrades not going as planned, but they've got more coming here. Aston Martin, Alonso's been fantastic. And then you've got Mercedes, who started a bit adrift, and they're closing in as well. And they've all had their moments where they've been the ones trying to take it to Red Bull, but ultimately getting nowhere near. And it's just Red Bull that is the predictable number one, and I'm sure that'll be the case again. I just think with Canada, on paper they were closer. All the teams, in fact, when you consider Ferrari's race pace, was similar to Aston Martin and Mercedes. But then you hear things on the radio like GP, Max's engineers, saying, well, perk up, looks like they're actually racing each other behind, so you might want to step on it a bit. And you're thinking, how much has Verstappen got in reserve at the front of the field when he's just got 10 seconds, 12-second buffer, and he's just measuring gaps at that point?
Yeah, I've said this, I think it was after Barcelona, and I noticed it again in Canada at different times, but Barcelona was just this great exhibition of almost just borderline sarcastic pace at the end of the race, where he's basically managed it the entire Grand Prix. And he's like, OK, an hour and a half in, got tyres still feel good. Oh, you want a series of fastest laps? Or like Sebastian Vettel-esque from his days dominating in Red Bull. And that's that kind of thing that Jolien's talking about, that, right? How much is it? Is it a tenth or two? Is it more? Is it over a whole stint? Or is it just because he's looked after the tyres so well, he's got an advantage in that moment? And I'd like to think they'd be tested more here. But if there are reasons to think that the other cars are going to be better suited to this track, I see no reason why it wouldn't also suit the Red Bull perfectly as well.
Well, Red Bull were worried about Canada. They thought that was not necessarily suiting their car, with a lot of slow corners, the chicanes, and they were pleased to get through that with another comfortable victory. So I think at the same token, they will be hoping to go well. It's just tricky, but it's also... It's not just Red Bull that had the monster car. They do, but Max is getting the most out of it. And that was so impressive about Max is you chuck in a wet qualifying, he's there. You chuck in wet but on slicks in the damp, he's there. You chuck in it starts on slicks and then it starts raining, he's there. You chuck in Monaco where anything could have happened when it starts to deluge and they're on slick tyres, he's there. Whereas his teammate, Sergio Perez, has been absent the last 3 Grand Prix, hasn't been on the podium, hasn't made Q3, and he was a championship challenger in the mighty Red Bull earlier on. And it just shows that things can go wrong, and testament to Max and his side of the garage. They've had things go wrong with reliability in qualifyings earlier on this season. Whatever happens with their car and that driver, they're getting back to the front and making it look so easy.
Well, that's going to sound nice and ominous for all those teams that we've just spoken about trying to chase Red Bull and Max Verstappen specifically down this weekend on home soil, as you say. But I'd like to throw another team into the mix now, Williams, and especially Alex Albon. Last time out in Canada, sensational drive from him, bit of a tyre whisperer, as we've already seen from him before. He had upgrades. Logan Sargent, his teammates, now going to be running them as well. They're saying that this track's going to suit them. which I like to believe, because I want to see more teams adding themselves to this list of the chasing pack. And perhaps we'll hear from Albon first. So Alex Albon, hoping his car's going to go well here at the Red Bull Ring.
I think we'll definitely be more competitive than where we first thought. This circuit has always suited us more than other circuits. So it was actually quite hard to truly see what the update did, because Canada is so bumpy, chicanes, low speed. You don't really get a true feeling for what the car can do. This will be much more of a representative look at what the upgrades can do. And then from there on, at least from our estimates, it's so tight out there. It's going to be really close. It's all going to be about nailing your lap. I think on a track like here, there's only really, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 corners that are
corners.
Because there's 10 corners on the track, but only 7 of them which matter. So when you have only 7 corners, it bunches everything up, and you've got to nail every single one.
How difficult is it for a driver, given how short the lap time is?
So, there's 2 things. Obviously, the fewer corners there are, the more it's important to get right, because it just gets closer. Lap times get closer. Hard to pull away from other cars in certain corners, let's say. But there's also, in my eyes, this track's a bit unique because there's so much thinking time. You go into turn 1, huge straight to turn 3, huge straight into turn 4, huge straight into turn 6. That's not always that nice, actually, because you're just, you're driving along. It's quite easy to be flat out in these cars, and it's a different kind of mindset. Whereas, for example, in Canada or in Hungary, your mind's just constantly in the zone. You're into the next corner. Here, you can daydream.
Be careful of that.
Yeah.
What do you normally daydream about?
I don't daydream. Actually, you can daydream. I don't normally daydream. But if I was to daydream,
oh, and he's gone. He's gone. There he is.
That's me. That's literally it. Oh, turn 3.
Well, Alex finished P7 in Montreal. Scott, do you think it's something they can translate into pace here in Austria?
I think a direct replica is probably going to be quite difficult. The main thing about that weekend is they didn't luck into any element of it. They nailed it when it got tricky in qualifying, and that wasn't a result that was then built on fluke in track position early in the race and holding on to it. They had to play the strategy very well, and then when Albon was able to utilise that tyre whisperer quality and just pull out a classic Alex Albon race, just manage that long stint perfectly. It was all earned, and at the heart of it was the straight line speed of the Williams, allowing him to drive sensibly, knowing that he's got that in defence basically in a straight line. You come here, I think what they're hoping is that the core goodness of that car, which is that it's fast in the straights, but they're making it a little bit better each upgrade through the corners. There is some potential for them to maybe not be top 10 and bank a P7, but be Q2, be a fringe top 10 car, and then execute perfectly, because the sprint weekend does open the door to others making mistakes.
And the good thing with them is they're genuine midfielders now, with Albon at least. And the Montreal, it was about tyre management, tyre strategy and defence. But what made it possible was that pace was there as well. And that's what Williams, when they've scored some points with Albon before, and you're thinking, where has that come? In Australia last year, when they were kind of nowhere, and then Albon just does the whole race on one set of tyres at a decent enough pace, and they get there. But that was with a bit of strategy help, and Spa as well. The straight line speed was good. They got the good qualifying pace and then just kept everyone behind. That was the case in Canada, but it was thanks to some good pace that they were even there to take advantage of it. They were already in the top 10 in the wet part of qualifying, then topped the bit when they were on 6 in the middle. And then Albon was genuinely fighting with midfield cars the whole way through the race, with the McLarens, with Pierre Gasly, Esteban Ocon. He was right there with cars that are definitely points contenders. And that's encouraging. And again, this track should be one that will suit them a bit more.
You mentioned McLaren there. Of course, this weekend, there's rather a lot of pressure on them to perform, bringing 50% of the upgrade, I think, is what we're expecting. Amazing that you can put a percentage on it like that. I think 50% in the sense that it's going to be on Lando Norris's car, but not Oscar Piastri's. And we're hearing that the team have worked extra hard to bring this upgrade this weekend instead of Silverstone, is where they were kind of expecting it to rock up. Is this the right weekend to bring it? Should they have waited to Silverstone, Scott?
Well, I think that's that's always the dilemma. It's a weekend like this is trickier because the sprint weekend means you only have FP1. You can't really run any back-to-backs, and if there is any extra lessons you need to learn, you don't have the luxury of 2 practice sessions, then a whole Friday night and Saturday morning and the final practice session before qualifying to really get it in the sweet spot. They are going to have to learn on the fly with this upgrade how it might change the car, the whatever behavioural differences that Lando feels behind the wheel. But the fact is, this is, I think, the first significant pure performance upgrade that they've got of the season. The Baku package was a bit of a course correction in the floor design philosophy that then facilitated bigger changes like this. So Lando's kind of quite keen to see how it changes the car, how many tenths of a second it gives them, where that shifts them in the pecking order. And I just think if you've got that on the table, don't wait a week for Silverstone. If you can get it on one car, learn the lessons, and maybe get a better result here for it, go for it. Makes your life harder, but we're in F1. It's not meant to be easy.
Could he get a podium? You know, this is where he scored his first podium, or this is La La Land. I'm now suggesting.
I'm pretty excited for the upgrade. I do think with the 1 hour practice, you can look really silly bringing a big upgrade package that has got high hopes, and then you don't get it in the sweet spot, and you don't have time to correct that. So there is a bit of a slight risk, and Alpine bought a big upgrade to Baku and ended up looking not great when Gasly's car was on fire in FP1 or the only practice, and they never got it working, and they had to wait for the next race in Miami to start seeing some progress on it. So that's the risk, but you got to chuck it on and hope that you do start in a decent window. Your preparation's been good. And then I think Norris has been doing such a good job already in what's been a pretty difficult McLaren. I really love what he was doing in Canada last time out. His racecraft was just the best I've seen it from him, and some of the best I've seen in years, actually, since Daniel Ricciardo was lunging in the Red Bull days. So if he's got a car that can fight for points, then I'm sure he can race towards them as a minimum this weekend.
Well, Alpine, as you were talking about, Jolyon, bringing that upgrade early on in the season at the last sprint race, they're making headlines as we go into this second sprint race, not really because of racing as such, but because of this financial interest. We've heard there's going to be a turnaround in their fortunes after Hollywood stars Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney have sort of, as part of an investor group, taken an equity stake in the team. Scott, how important is this for a team like Alpine, and how necessary is it now in Formula One to have big Hollywood investors, or is it not really at all?
I think it's a sign of how much interest there is in owning equity in Formula One, and also shows just how much you now need to pay to even get your hands on a small slice of a midfield team, because this deal values at Alpine at, I think it's it's probably around $900 million US dollars, so it's getting close to that $1 billion mark that a lot of teams have been talking about. I wouldn't like to think how much you'd have to pay. If Porsche had managed to get that Red Bull deal over the line and bought 50% of that, they'd have paid a fortune for it. But for Alpine, I think it's important because that team still needs some capital expenditure investment. The facilities are still behind some of the biggest teams, and I think, again, Jolyon probably better placed to comment than I am, but I always had the impression that Renault have wanted to do a Works F1 team at around 80% of the cost of a real Works F1 team. Well, now they've got someone that can foot 24% of the bill. So it just feels like if you do need to put your money where your mouth is, it's easier for the board to justify it, because they don't necessarily have to foot it. They've now got a couple of €100 million if they wanted to sink back into the F1 project in some way.
No Hollywood actors knocking on the door when you were linked to the what was Renault team back in the day, Jolyon?
No one knocking around there. No, we did have Pharrell Williams came down to a race in Monaco, and everyone was a bit excited in the crew, and he just fell asleep on arrival and we woke up after the Grand Prix. We didn't dabble too much after that with the A-listers, but they're back on, and I mean, on the one side it's good, and this group and Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, I love the Wrexham story. I love it. The buying a non-league football club, a really old traditional football club, and trying to make them good. I love that. Alpine is just such a different proposition, and it takes the fact that they've already done this really cool thing and they're trying to get into something that's already very big. It's kind of, does it take away? They're now just trying to do the same thing, or are they trying to use their
can lightning strike twice? Do you know what I mean? It's like so
exactly.
Fairy tale. The Wrexham
I love
story.
the fairy tale of the Wrexham is so different to Alpine, and then you could see how they could add so much value to Wrexham, a non-league football club, and they've added huge value. Whereas Alpine, again, we're talking like a $1 billion business or just under, with huge marketing departments. They had Zinedine Zidane on at the launch. They've got major ambassadors. So having some A-listers around there is not quite like them turning up to Wrexham Football Club. It's a nice draw for Formula One. But also it does say, when Renault took over, you sort of hoped that they could get back to their halcyon days of title fighting and really put everything in. But it does just say that are they half committed to the project now, and they've just offloaded a quarter of the team. Where's the commitment from a huge manufacturer that can do it? And especially in a cost cap era, there's no reason they can't dream of fighting at the front. But hey, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, you would imagine it would be more a sort of privateer team that would take an investment like that rather than a works team. Well, I'll tell you what, one person who's very excited about this is Alpine driver Esteban Ocon. He's been on the phone to Ryan Reynolds this week already. He's been sending him some simulator pictures. So let's hear how Esteban's feeling now that he's got Hollywood backing him all the way to the top step of the podium.
It's awesome, and I was very lucky to be able to chat to Ryan on the phone on Tuesday. I had a very cool chat. He's very much looking forward to learn, from our world, and I'm invited to the Deadpool set as well. So this I can't wait. I'm a massive fan of comics, of the Marvels, and yeah, I never thought I would have been able to chat to Ryan, but here it is. And yeah, all the investors that are joining, I think it's super news. It really shows the commitment of Alpine in the long term. And also they are going to bring their expertise, to improve all the weak areas that we have in the team. They have a lot of knowledge on sports team, and that's very good for us.
Is there an element of pressure now, and they want certain performances from you? I'm thinking of Wrexham Football Club. Obviously, they've had success with them. They're going to want the same from you. Do you think you can deliver that?
That's what we want. We want to be able to fight to the top as soon as we can. We had a podium this year. We're on the upward trajectory, and I think that is also why all these people believe in us, because they are coming on board. So it's positive pressure, all good.
Just to sort of wrap up the Alpine story, I find it interesting that this deal obviously is not a work of a moment, and about a month and a bit or so ago we were hearing Laurent Rossi, the CEO of Alpine, pointing fingers, being very vocal in the media about the team's performance. Do you think that was him trying to show the Hollywood stars that they do mean business, they're going to turn the form around?
I can imagine it was partially motivated by frustration that when you're trying to sell this team as a successful proposition with a lot of potential, and you're just underperforming chronically, which is what they were doing at the start of this year. And I think the main thing for me was that the team didn't need to be told that by the CEO, who is a distant observer for the F1 team itself, turns up to the races they want to turn up to, but by design leaves that team to exist and run as best as it can in the hands of capable F1 experts. That's what it's meant to be. So then intervening and getting a bit shouty and being a bit strong, both in French and in English media, I don't really see how that would do anything other than add pressure and annoy people. I don't really see it as a source of much motivation. But then obviously it worked, in quotation marks, and he kind of took the credit for it and said, well, see, we sorted it out.
Well, when Monaco came and they did a perfectly chiselled team performance and got a podium, they must have been chuffed with that, with a deal looming.
There's your Hollywood ending, absolutely. It's over before it's begun. Well, guys, that brings us to the end of our preview of the Austrian Grand Prix. Scott Mitchell-Marm and Jolyon Palmer, thanks so much for talking us through it all.
The accordion was invented by an Austrian, Cyril Demian.
And that's why you listen
in
to
1829, and that's why you come to the Austrian Grand Prix and you get all the old Austrian culture. Lovely.
I'm sending you off for a lesson with the monsieur. Probably don't say that. The Herren. The Herren. There we go. That's right, isn't it? Herren and Damen.
Sounds right.
Yeah. I'll say it with an accent. Surely they'll believe me. Guys, thank you so much. We'll be back tomorrow when you can catch all the sessions on the BBC Sport website. And then on Sunday, you can hear the race in full here on 5 Live from 2 p.m. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.